Let's move on now to talk about what we want to watch for in our dogs when they seem to have issues with how they take the food. So how your dog takes the food matters. It's not just that they eat it and swallow it, but there are some signs that I would watch for that suggest that my dog is not completely comfortable with the process of taking food, and I need to think about what's going on here. First of all, grabbing and sharkiness. That hurts. It's painful. We've all had the case of a dog who unexpectedly to us grabs at the food in our hand and of course gets flesh along with food. Nobody likes that. That is unpleasant all the way around when you have a dog that's very, very grabby and has a mouth that they don't control well. Cleaning up our mechanics can help a lot. Back to the idea that if we are very consistent in the way we provide the food, and we provide it in a way that's easy and comfortable for our dogs to get, then that is going to be very helpful. Also, look at a dog's arousal levels. Typically, when you have a dog that normally doesn't grab food, but they start grabbing and becoming sharky, something's going on that has raised their arousal levels. So typically higher arousal leads to taking treats harder and with less thoughtfulness. We've all learned that lesson, I think, the hard way. The first time I showed one of my Shelties, Smudgy, in agility, and Smudgy loved agility just as much as he loved life, which was a lot. So first time going in the ring in a trial, we're both nervous. I'm waiting at the start line. Smudgy or waiting in line. Not at the start line yet. But Smudgy always took treats very, very gently. And the next thing I know, he just grabbed and I'm bleeding all over the place. And it was a total surprise because that was not the norm for him at all. But the arousal came up because of the excitement of being at our first trial and being close to the ring. So that told me I needed to be much more thoughtful and careful about getting him prepared to go up to the ring than I had been before. So it gave me some useful information. It's a painful lesson, but it's an important lesson. The way that we typically start teaching our dogs to take treats gently is by using this technique we call slow treats. So here's a little tutorial with Quest on how we use slow treats. Oops, sorry. Turn this up.
Step 1. Good. Hold up the treat. Dog hold still. Good. Mark.
Notice I'm using the calm marker of good and taking the treat to him.
Good.
Basically, if he doesn't move towards me, he gets the treat.
Good. Marking stillness and taking the cookie to Quest. Good. Questy's so excited to be looking. Good. When my dog can reliably do that step, then I start moving the cookie a little closer.
And look how I have my hand oriented and how I move it. I try to be very consistent with that.
Still holding still, I reinforce.
The way my hand is held, the way it goes down, the way I turn it as I give the treat.
Good.
Oh, all that.
Smooth going in. Once I've said good, I want to get the cookie to him in a reasonable time. Good. But it starts slow up here. Good. And as long as he's waiting, cookie comes to him. If he moves towards the cookie, it goes away. So let me try to make him make a mistake. See that? He went to it. Good. It went away. He holds still. It comes to him. Good. But start out up here at your shoulder level. Move by an inch, an inch, an inch. If your dog is mauling you, good. The first step is for him to back off it all. Mark that and reinforce it. Backing away from the cookie gets it to you. Good. Holding still and being patient as the cookie comes to you makes it come. So here's where it's slow. Good. Once I mark, I take it in at a more reasonable speed. I don't want to push to destruction. Good. I want my dog to be successful over and over and over again. Good job, Questy. Until eventually he can hold out until the cookie gets there. This is not where we start. Good. That's our goal. But that's not where we start. We start up here, we start at 1, 2, 3, good boy, and work our way down to having the cookie right in their faces. That's the goal. So it's a process, but if it's not right up here, if your dog isn't backing off and holding still up here, it's never going to be right further down the line. Good job, Questy.
The idea behind the slow treats exercise, and this is something I start with very, very young puppies whenever possible, but you can start it at any age dog. It'll just be more challenging if they're used to grabbing and used to moving into you to get the cookie. But the whole goal of this is for my dog to learn, the treat will come to you. I will mark first. It will be there. It's all going to be very smooth, very clear, very consistent, very calm. I don't want them all excited and jumping around and frantic to try to figure out how to grab the cookie from me. I want them to learn that just waiting for it to come is the goal. And I use this in a lot of different settings and for different situations, but it's really good for teaching them to also take gently. There's no coming at me to grab. There's waiting for the food to come to them, which makes this a much nicer exercise for everybody involved. I would highly recommend you work slow treats. Now, you might have a dog with the other problem, not that they're grabbing at it and trying to get the treat from you, but they're reluctant to take the food. They're just not very enthusiastic. Now, it might be the food you have, which is the first thing we think about is value. Maybe it's low value. But you have this dog who might take the food if you sort of insist, and they might eat it, or they might drop it, right, and just leave it there. They may chew and swallow slowly, if at all. And this is concerning. And the first thing, okay, two possibilities here. It's a physical issue. It's a stress issue. So we need to, of course, consider the physical issues first. Is there a physical reason why it's uncomfortable for the dog to take this food? Maybe there's an issue with the mouth or the teeth or the throat. So I would want to make sure that there are no issues physically in that way. The other physical issue is there a food sensitivity or an allergy where this food actually ends up making them sick, so they've learned that it's a bad thing. And we really need to know. Many dogs have very sensitive digestive systems and a variety of foods. Until we figure out the right things, food makes them sick. And when food makes you sick, even if it's a low level like a nausea that we've all felt at some point or the other, we don't want to eat that food again. If we go, okay, every time I get this, then I feel bad. The smart money says stop eating that because it's bad for you. Same is true for our dogs. So it's possible there's a physical reason, and don't discount that because that's huge. It's all, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself here. So, taste preferences. Sometimes dogs just like one thing better than another, like us. There are things they like and they don't like. That sensitivity or intolerance, teeth or mouth issues, GI issues, and illness. Maybe they're getting sick, but it's not apparent yet. So if you have a dog who regularly takes food just fine and suddenly starts refusing it, maybe something is going on there, okay, that you haven't seen a full-blown effect of yet. So all things to keep an eye on, all things to check first. Don't assume anything else when a dog, especially if a dog has normally been food motivated and then is not. Now, if you always have food motivation issues as well, I think GI issues, I think sensitivity or intolerance, I want to check all that out before I start to assume it's a psychological issue, or stress issue. Inconsistency. You can't predict when your dog's going to like a food reinforcer or when they won't. Some days they're interested and they train just great for food, and that gives you hope that you're on the right track. And then other times they're like, no thanks, not interested right now. And that's very depressing. This requires a lot of detective work. It's easy to train a food-motivated dog. I say this over and over and over. Very easy to train a food-motivated dog. Very difficult when we get into these cases where we have a lot of inconsistency of when they will eat and what they will eat, and what effect it has on them. Is it physical or psychological? Don't know. Could be stress-related, could be health-related. Is it the value of the food? Possibly. Don't know that either. Is it that you're in a location that's difficult for your dog, that's stressful, like if this happens in class but not at home, that's a pretty obvious pattern that it's the location that's stressful and causing them to not want to eat. Or is it the behavior you're working on? Are you working on something that they find difficult or overly challenging? And so they're giving up and they don't want the food reinforcer either. Or is it both of those things? That's what's hard to know sometimes. So is it the location you're in? Is it what you're trying to teach? Is it a combination? This is hard to sort out when you get into this kind of problem. And I feel really badly for people because you can't make a lot of training progress when the most useful primary reinforcer of food isn't really available to you. Now, I'm going to talk about other things and other ways to reinforce because I think that's important no matter what. But that becomes even more important when food just isn't consistently reliable for you as a reinforcer. So emotional issues, right? The dog's emotions, food equals good. Some dogs believe this very much. Therefore, no food equals bad. So if you use a lot of food as a reinforcer and then you stop, very likely your dog is going to become concerned about that and think they're making mistakes or doing the wrong thing. In trying to fade out food reinforcers, we have to be very careful and very thoughtful. You don't go from all to none. We have to fade out over time based on the behavior, how comfortable your dog is with it, how much effort it takes, the situation or location you're in. There's a lot to consider there, but we don't want our dogs to begin to think that when they don't get a food reinforcer, something's wrong and the behavior is incorrect. That is going to lead us to many, many problems. Human emotions come into play as well. We like to feed our dogs because we love them and we want to see them happy, and food makes them happy. Okay? So food equals love. Therefore, if I'm not feeding my dog, I feel bad about that. I feel like I'm taking away something very important from them and they will think I don't love them anymore. That isn't logical, but it is certainly the way that people sometimes very strongly feel without even realizing it. That I'm showing my dog how much I care about them by feeding them a lot. And so that's my mode of communication. That's telling them something important. And people are worried if they slow down or stop the feeding, their dogs are going to feel like they're not loved anymore. And this is the way we show love to people as well. This is why we overfeed people we love, because it's our language. Is food tells you that I care about you. So we need to separate those emotions from training behaviors. And that's hard to do for a lot of us. So we keep feeding and keep feeding and keep feeding long after we need to do it for the actual training. And we have a very hard time cutting down on food. And then when we do, it goes back up to dog emotions. And our dog's like, what? Everything, all of a sudden, things are wrong. I don't get that. But they've been used to being fed for pretty much every repetition of behaviors, no matter what. And now we've worked ourselves into a corner where it's been too much food without going through a stage of fading it out for specific behaviors and in specific situations. Those emotional issues are strong ones. They're emotional and they override logic and they're very hard to change. But admitting and knowing they're there, I think, is important. This next topic then is poison food. Poison, when food becomes aversive in some way, or it becomes a signal that bad things may happen or stressful things may occur next. And that can happen very, very easily. So food is a stress predictor. You bring out the food before or during stressful events. And quickly, the food becomes paired with unpleasant emotions. It doesn't take many repetitions at all, especially if the stress is high. That food becomes, especially if it just comes first, becomes an obvious predictor. This is a classical conditioning process. We typically don't even mean for it to happen, but it does. And it can be very, very strong. The first hint that this is happening is food reluctance or refusal. And if I see that, I want to be very careful. I don't want to keep repeating this, because the more often you repeat food, unpleasant event, food, stressful event, then the more suspicious our dog becomes. And the further down the wrong path we're going with food. Bringing out the food does not necessarily make an unpleasant event better. We have to use it properly in order for that to occur. So we need to be careful about using food in situations that our dogs may well be very uncomfortable. So dogs become suspicious because food has become a signal for stress and or danger. Easy to happen. And so now your dog views the appearance of food, especially that food, or maybe particularly in a specific situation, like at the vet's office, that the appearance of food now means, oh, something bad's about to happen to me. Rather than making the event better, the event makes food worse. So we want to think carefully about this and not fall into this trap where food leads to bad things happening to you. Because the food won't override. For many dogs, the food won't override the bad thing. It simply becomes associated and connected with the bad thing. And now the food itself takes on those qualities of being unpleasant, making the dog suspicious. So we want to be careful about using food in stressful situations, because that can very easily happen. Luring, okay, where we're bringing out food to cause a behavior to happen, can also have some pitfalls. Okay? I have nothing against luring. I use it for many behaviors. I think it's a very valid technique for teaching lots of things. But I'm also very thoughtful about how I use it. It needs to be faded out very early in the training process, in my opinion. I don't want to use it for too long, because if not, it becomes an integral part of prompting the behavior. It becomes part of the cue for the behavior to happen. And once you get that, it's very hard to fade it out, because it's necessary for the behavior to occur. Okay? Many years ago, I had students who had a nice little Sheltie, and they were teaching their dog the A-frame. And the dog would get up to the top of the A-frame, come over and stop. And so they were telling me that they started having this ongoing problem. I said, of course, let's see what you've got. So the dog comes up, the A-frame goes over, stops. They try to encourage dog to come down. Nothing happens. The owner pulls a cookie out of her pocket, lures the dog down to the end, feeds the dog. So what has happened there? The cookie becomes necessary for the dog to come down to the end of the A-frame. Of course, the people didn't realize that that's what they were doing. They were getting the behavior they wanted, but they had made the cookie, and doing that, that made the cookie a part of that behavior that was necessary. And that's not what they wanted at all, because you can't do that in a trial. Also, dogs who follow food are thinking about food. It's the most salient, most obvious thing, is that the food is out in front of them. So they're not thinking as much about what they're doing as they are about following the food. And I want to switch that pretty quickly. I will use lures to help me get something started. But then I want to transition away from the lure and get the dog thinking about, oh, what was it that earned the reinforcer, not where do I follow this food? So I want to change that type of thinking. Important things to keep in mind. And that keeping the food out of being the cue for the behavior and prompting it is a big one here. Food decisions. So we're making decisions as trainers. We make the choices about when and how to use food reinforcers. Our dogs don't get to make these decisions. We are making these choices for our dogs, and we need to make them carefully and thoughtfully. So first of all are we using too much of a good thing? Food works for the most part. That's why we use it. So are we falling into a bit of a trap with it, where we're using food randomly and indiscriminately? We just keep using more and more food because it works so well, without thinking about the consequences of that. I think that's true for many people, that food for everything. Dog breathes, they get food. Dog looks at you, they get food. Dog lays down, they get food. So food's happening all the time, all over the place. Dog looks cute, they get food. I'm very guilty of that as well. But you're risking satiation, and you're risking the food not meaning anything. It's no longer reinforcing behavior if it's just happening almost all the time. And I've seen people mindlessly feeding and feeding and feeding, like sitting in a seminar listening to somebody talk. And why are they feeding? I don't know. I don't know if they know. They just are. Also keep in mind that what's easily available is not seen as valuable. When it's common, it's no big deal. It'll happen again. It happens all the time. I don't have to work for something when I get so much of it regularly for free, or what seems to the dog to be for free. So keep that in mind, that too much of a good thing. You want to know why you're feeding. So this gets into thoughtful as opposed to thoughtless feeding. If you're just giving cookies out of habit, because that's what we do, and I do that, we give bedtime cookies. Why? You don't need a cookie to go to bed, but it's a habit that I enjoy, and that's why I do it. So thinking to yourself, why did I give that cookie? Especially in training situations, what was that cookie for? And I've heard Denise Fenzi ask students this, and they're usually speechless because they don't know. It was a habit cookie. It was a nervousness cookie. It was because I was trying to pay attention and I didn't want to have to pay attention to my dog. I was trying to pay attention to the instructor. Okay. So, but knowing why. Automatic thoughtless feeding is what we want to avoid. Don't be in the past in positive reinforcement training. People often used to say you want to be a Pez dispenser. Don't be a Pez dispenser because that's thoughtless. Okay? Think about what you're doing. Food, though, this thing of giving food, it's soothing for both the dog and the trainer. It makes us feel better. It's something familiar. It's something comfortable. So we do it because it makes us both feel better. But is the food, that food that you're giving right now, really serving a necessary purpose or function? If the answer is yes, keep doing it. But if the answer is I don't know or I don't think so, then maybe you don't need food there. Maybe you don't need so much food all the time in every situation, because you're going to be working against your best interest as a trainer if you're doing that. Okay? Make your food meaningful and valuable, and let it help you communicate with your dog. Don't just have it as like this whole random thing that happens sometimes for no apparent reason. Alternatives to food. So I've been talking a lot about food, and when I said earlier that there are some dogs that, for a number of reasons, it just might not be food motivated, I find them harder to train. But there are alternatives, and I do work to develop those alternatives in all my dogs, because I want lots of options besides just food as a reinforcer. Right? So there are many other reinforcement options available to us. Often, though, they may require more effort to establish, and they definitely require more effort to maintain over time. And I'll talk about what some of these options are, and then I'll go into how we develop a lot of these with puppies, and what I say about puppies would apply to a dog who's new to me, no matter how old they are. I would like to establish some alternatives to food as your major reinforcer. So toys and play. Most puppies are playful, but we lose that somewhere along the way. So continuing to encourage play as dogs mature, rather than letting it go once they get past their playful, happy puppy stage. We work hard to develop enjoyable interactions with our dogs, but they have a format or a structure to them. So our dogs, again, know what to expect. They're predictable, they're consistent. But we do interact with our dogs in a variety of different ways, with a variety of different toys and objects, and in different types of play, which I'll talk about. In the early stages of this, we're observing our dog's reactions and building on them. I'm not really teaching my dog to play. I'm discovering how my dog likes to play. That's different. That's very different. I'm looking at my dog's preferences, desires, tendencies, and then I'm building on those, okay, and helping to make those stronger and to develop into games that we can enjoy together. That go beyond, that's enjoyable personal interaction that goes beyond just giving you a cookie. Movement is very compelling to many, many dogs. The movement of other creatures, they're very interested in. Do they like to chase? That's true of many types of dogs, that they kind of naturally like chase. Do they like to be chased? There are some dogs that like to be the bunny, as opposed to being the predator and chasing. So playing around with chase games. Which one does your dog prefer more? How can you tell? Moving with them. Teaching them that moving with you is fun. Right? So playing games where you stop and start together. and where you are sort of unpredictable and erratic in your movement. See how they react to that. Okay. So I can move away from my dog, I can move towards my dog, and I do this in little itty-bitty steps. I don't overwhelm my dog. I don't want to scare my dog with this. And when starting with puppies, it's teeny tiny little bits. I move like this much towards you. And what do? Maybe they jump away and come back, and then I move away, and you jump towards me. And now we have a movement game that we're starting to develop together. This movement tends to help us modulate arousal levels. More movement, more excitement, slower, calmer, less movement, bringing them down a little bit. This is something we're going to want to do often in performance with our dogs. So we're going to get them higher, get that energy level up for performance, or we're going to want to get it down a little bit because they're too high and too wild, and so we want to bring it down. Our movement with them can help do that. So we have to experiment with it and see how this particular dog responds, and then, as I said, build on that, build from there. Physical interaction, touch, and praise of all sorts. These can be great as reinforcers and as positive interactions with our dogs. But oftentimes we need to teach this as well. So non-food and non-toy options for reinforcing interactions. We explore this at great length in the Focus Games class, which is just, when this runs, I think it will have just ended. But this is one of the things we explore a lot. We have food, play, and games and interactions, but also let's see what else your dog likes. So discovering your dog's preferences, as I said, then building on those. Finding the just right energy and excitement level to prompt a response from your dog. If we're using food a lot, we're typically relying on the food to do this job for us, to help our dogs become more motivated, more enthusiastic, more interested in what we're doing. When you take away the option of food, now we have to find all of these other ways. Okay, so vocally, can we get our dogs more excited? Can we do it with our movement? Can we do it with touch games? Okay, so if I playfully push a little bit on my dog, do they come back for more? If I push and they run away, that tells me I've done that. I've made a mistake here. I need to alter what I'm doing. But I'm trying to figure out what can I do with what I have basically as my body to engage this dog with me, to get them to want to be interested in, and to find games that are mutually enjoyable for both of us. So I'm working very hard to find those things. Let me show you a video here of Judy with, I think this is Pixel. As a tiny baby puppy, and here she's introducing a lot of non-food reinforcement in a little tiny play session. And we do tons of these with our puppies. They're very informal, yet they serve a purpose. And we know that we're doing them not only because they're fun, which they are, but because we'll be able to use these very things later on. So let's take a look at little baby Pixel here. So she's got a toy that she's using movement of the toy with, and he likes that very much. He likes to turn. He likes to grab. Oh, he's like, oh, don't know what to do with that. I have no idea. So she starts doing physical play. And that's not him whining. That's another dog. But watch his reaction. He seems to be enjoying himself. He's coming back for more. If he didn't like it, she would not do this level of intensity. But he's getting very excited about it. And he's vocalizing with his barks. But they're happy barks. They're excited barks. So what happens, she pushes him away, he comes back. She pushes him away, he comes back. Now we've got the beginnings of a really good game that we can play that doesn't involve food. And he eventually does learn to retrieve toys quite nicely. But of course, he's a puppy. Once you throw it, it's like it's out of sight, out of mind. But you can see how she switched from toy play, which he was engaged in. Then she went into physical play with him, which he also enjoyed. And she was gauging her level of intensity with that very carefully, and especially with young puppies. We don't want to overwhelm them. We don't want to scare them with our interaction. We want to watch their response and make sure that what we've done is welcome and they're interested in it continuing. So that's a little non-food reinforcement. The other thing we can think about with non-food reinforcement is using Premack's principle, basically, which says more preferred behavior can reinforce less preferred behavior. Premack's principle is based on preference. What does my dog want to do? So I have to be able to identify something my dog wants to do. And the preference is from the dog's perspective, not what I want of them, but what they really, truly would like to do in terms of an activity right now. What is their choice? So I can control, if I can control the ability to perform the more preferred behavior and make it contingent on the less preferred one happening first. That's a lot of words. Let me put it more simply here. Okay. For my dog, sit before I let you go outside. There are two activities possible here. Right? You can sit, then I let you go outside. My dogs prefer to go outside, but they have learned the contingency. They have learned that sitting first means now I get to do the thing I really want to do with it, go outside. Doesn't make sitting any more valuable to them. Sitting is a means to an end. It gets me what I want. It goes along with the typical example of eat your vegetables and then you can have dessert. That may work for some people, for some kids, but it doesn't mean that now I like vegetables any better. They're a means to an end. I have to eat my vegetables so I can go outside. Or I have to eat my vegetables so I can have dessert, or I have to sit so I can go outside. Okay, so Premack's principle can work in cases where you can control the situation enough to get the less preferred behavior, and then you allow them the more preferred one. So sometimes something like I want you to focus on me. You focus on me, I tell you to go sniff. Okay. Sniffing is likely the more preferred behavior. I get the focus, less preferred, now you can sniff. So that can work in a lot of situations. So use Premack's principle when it makes sense. This last section then, before we go to question and answer, puppies and reinforcers. Okay. I want to establish a proper food relationship with my puppy early in their life, as early as possible, or new dog, as early as possible. I want to lay the groundwork for liking food as a reinforcer, but also for being flexible about other reinforcement options. So I want to think carefully about this and not get into an exclusive reliance on food too early in my puppy's life. That's going to be a problem. I want my puppy to have a good food relationship. How do I want my dog to feel about food as a reinforcer? Okay. I want them to feel good about it. Okay. But I also want it to be healthy. I don't want them to be totally obsessed with nothing else but food. I want them to find food desirable. So food is valuable and desirable, but that other options can work just as well. Okay. So food's not the only game in town by a long shot. Okay. What I really want in an ideal world is a dog who will work for food, but can switch to other options without disappointment. This is the big part, without disappointment. I want them to be able to work for food, but if it's time to work for toys, or if it's time to work for some sort of social play, physical play, then my dog is also happy to do that, without constantly wanting just the food. That's my goal. And I need to think about that early. It's easier to establish early in our training relationship than it's going to be later. It's possible to make some changes, but if you've established this core belief in your dog that food is the only acceptable primary reinforcer, you have limited yourself quite a bit. So make sure you expand this as much as you can, because it will really, really help you in your training overall. I refer to this as reinforcer flexibility. Okay? And we're going to talk about reinforcer switching. But the ability to switch reinforcers, just such a huge advantage in training. There are some behaviors where food works best, and I want to use food, often for encouraging a particular level of arousal, or because I can get in a lot of repetitions very quickly with a small food reinforcer over and over again. I might decide food is what I need for a particular behavior. It makes sense here. So think about that. Does food really turn out to be the best reinforcer here, or is it just because it's easiest for me? Toys and play, however, work better for other behaviors and typically for higher levels of arousal. So when I want more movement, more energy, more excitement, enthusiasm, then I might want to go to something more physical as a reinforcer. It may take longer for each repetition, but it will get my dog into the state of arousal and the state of mind that I want them to be. Innate tendencies and preferences exist in dogs. Some dogs just naturally want more food. Some dogs just naturally prefer play. But these can be adjusted, again, most easily in puppyhood or when you're starting a new training relationship with a dog. Once you've established your training relationship and sort of your mode of communication and transaction, if food is the primary part of that, it's hard to change that without your dog feeling disappointed when you try to substitute something else. But when you're in a new training relationship, it's easiest to do that. Not that it's not possible to do it in any training relationship, but it's easiest to do it in a new one. Definitely something to think about with the next dog. We don't make the same mistakes, we make new mistakes. So introducing reinforcer variety early and often so that I can switch it up in a session and my dogs will be fine with that. I want to introduce those switching strategies early and often. I'm thoughtful about these sessions. That just looks like I'm playing with my dog and giving them cookies, but I'm actually doing all of this for very particular reasons because it will help with reinforcement flexibility. I want to move between two reinforcers with flow. I want to go from one to the other and back and forth so that it all comes together as part of the same session. I don't want food, stop, play, stop, food. I want it to eventually be whatever. Some reinforcer is going to be coming next, but I'm enjoying the one I have now. So I'm trying to build enjoyment for all reinforcers. We typically see in dogs where there's been a primary reliance on food that maybe they'll play, but when the food comes out, then they won't go back to play. So that's the part for me where I pay a lot of attention with puppies. And I work very hard to move from food back to play again. That to me is a big switch that's very, very important to have. I'm going to show you this video with Bear. This is an older video. And we're doing a couple things. We're doing everything I've talked about here with reinforcer switching. This also at the same time, I like it because it multitasks for me, is teaching them to release toys on a verbal cue. So we're doing a little bit of two things here.
Okay, we're working on tug and let go.
So we established the tug first.
So we're going to play a little tug, give him an out cue, which he doesn't understand.
Really excited about it.
Stick a cookie in front of his nose. Say out. Good. That was better. So now let's see if we can get him back to playing after he had a cookie. This is hard for some dogs, but we really want to teach him to go back and forth between cookies and toys. That's a key. Lots of adult dogs, once you bring out the food, the toys don't mean much. So we want to play, then introduce the food.
So the food comes in to get the release.
Let's go. Tell him he's outing. Take it away. Very good.
And then we go back to play.
And then play again.
And you can see, and you can't see real well, but Judy's actually building interest with kind of her body movement.
I can't see what you're doing with his head when you're having him out. You're getting turned away from me. There.
But she's not going to stop playing until he's very committed to playing.
Once he notices it. Good.
And then the food comes for letting go.
The cookie. Really?
Oh, yeah, that was excellent. That was very excellent.
Pushing. It's fun.
Was very excellent.
Okay. Cookie on nose. Okay, let's go. Good.
Good boy.
Excellent. That was good.
And it turns out with Bear, he was very easy to balance between food and toys, and he would switch back and forth really easily. You can almost see this here. He was involved with the toy. He was enjoying it. He got engaged in that game. Then he's learning, oh, okay, cookie comes out. I let go. I get the cookie. Like cookies. He liked his cookies. But then I go back to playing again. And that's where we want to be with our dogs, that we could do either thing. And again, without disappointment. They're happy to take what we're offering at the moment. That's going to be just that is such a huge advantage in your training. So introducing those early and often to switching between reinforcers. And we do it switching between toys, and we do it switching between tugging and physical play, and then sometimes food. So we'll introduce more complexity to this as we go along. So that's what I have to say to talk about with food and your thoughtful use of food. And now we are at the part where you get to ask me questions. So let's see what you want to know.